They tell you that your home is your castle, that the borders of your property are these sacred, invisible lines drawn in the very earth to protect your peace of mind. But what they don't tell you is that a castle without a moat is just an invitation for the entitled to march right in, bringing their chaotic arrogance into your carefully cultivated sanctuary. I bought my home in Cypress Creek Estates, a supposedly idyllic, high-end neighborhood nestled in the leafy suburbs of Naperville, Illinois, precisely because it offered a pristine slice of the American dream, a place where I poured my soul, my sweat, and countless weekend hours into transforming a barren patch of dirt into a hyper-realistic, vibrantly green tapestry of Kentucky bluegrass, bordering it with delicate, crimson heritage roses that I nurtured like my own children, seeking a sense of control and beauty in a world that so often lacks both. But peace, as I quickly learned, is fragile, easily shattered by the heavy, oblivious footsteps of Beatrice, a woman who lived 3 houses down and operated under the grandiose delusion that the world, including my meticulously manicured front lawn, was merely a red carpet rolled out for her personal convenience. The sidewalk curved gently around my corner lot, a deliberate, aesthetic choice by the urban planners of Naperville. But for Beatrice, clad in her designer athleisure wear, armed with an aggressively swinging iced coffee and a perpetual scowl of self-importance, that gentle curve represented a profound injustice to her daily routine, a theft of perhaps 5 seconds from her power walking schedule, and so, she simply decided that my lawn was her new thoroughfare. At first, sitting by the bay window in the golden hour lighting that cast long, dramatic shadows across the grass, I watched her diagonal intrusion with a kind of stunned disbelief, assuming, in my naive optimism, that it was a one-time lapse in judgment, an accidental wandering of a distracted mind. But then it happened the next day, and the day after that, her heavy, expensive sneakers crushing the tender blades of grass, leaving a visible, agonizing trail of destruction that cut dangerously close to my fragile roses, trampling the very boundary of my personal refuge. I am not an unreasonable man. I believe in diplomacy, in the gentle, neighborly fabric of suburban life. So I approached her one humid Tuesday afternoon, catching her mid-stride, framing my face in a soft, accommodating smile, and politely requested, with all the deference I could muster, that she perhaps utilize the concrete pathway designed explicitly for pedestrian travel, explaining how hard I was working to establish the root system in that specific corner. She stopped, turning her head slowly, looking at me not as a fellow human being or a homeowner, but as if I were a particularly annoying insect buzzing around her peripheral vision, and with a voice dripping in condescending sweetness, she dismissed my life's work, my sanctuary, as just dirt, telling me not to be so dramatic before turning on her heel and marching directly over a blooming rose, leaving me standing there in the suffocating Illinois heat, a silent volcano of repressed frustration. The injustice of it all began to gnaw at my spirit, a dark, cinematic tension building in the quiet moments of the evening. Because when diplomacy fails, you turn to the visual language of boundaries, leading me to purchase a tasteful, wrought iron miniature fence, standing barely a foot tall, meant to act as a psychological barrier, a polite whisper saying, "Please stay out," which I installed along the property line, hoping the sheer visual disruption would divert her path. I watched the next day, my heart hammering a chaotic rhythm against my ribs, as she approached the new barrier, the afternoon sun catching the metallic glint of the tiny fence, and for a fleeting, triumphant second, she paused, but then, with a casual, devastating fluidity that mocked my efforts, she simply lifted her long, athletic leg, stepped cleanly over the iron spikes without so much as breaking her stride or altering the cadence of her loud phone conversation, and continued her desecration of my property, transforming my physical deterrent into a mere hurdle in her daily obstacle course. Driven to the edge of despair, feeling the profound isolation that comes when your boundaries are repeatedly violated without consequence, I turned to the supposed guardians of our community standards, filing a meticulous, heavily documented complaint with the Cypress Creek Homeowners Association, led by a rigidly bureaucratic woman named Margaret, attaching high-contrast photographs of the trampled earth, the crushed petals, the clear violation of the social contract. The response I received weeks later was a masterpiece of institutional cowardice, a sterile, legally vetted email from Margaret stating that the HOA does not police informal pedestrian traffic unless structural damage is incurred, essentially giving Beatrice a free pass to vandalize my peace of mind, passing the buck back to me with a hollow suggestion to foster community dialogue, a phrase that tasted like ash in my mouth. Desperate, I even dialed the non-emergency line of the Naperville Police Department, pleading my case to a weary dispatcher, only to be told, with frustrating finality, that unless she was actively refusing to leave while I was standing there, or causing malicious, quantifiable destruction, they could not dedicate resources to monitoring my lawn, leaving me completely, utterly abandoned by every system designed to protect a man's home. The anger wasn't just about the grass anymore. It was about the profound, suffocating disrespect, the crushing realization that a bully could waltz through your life, destroy your quiet sanctuary, and the world would simply look away, forcing me to gaze out at the muddy, scarred trench running across my yard, realizing with terrifying clarity that if I wanted justice, if I wanted to reclaim my territory and my dignity, I was going to have to architect it myself. When you are pushed into a corner, when the institutions fail you and the polite rules of society are weaponized against you by those who refuse to follow them, your mind undergoes a fascinating, dark evolution, shedding the constraints of neighborly passivity and embracing the cold, calculated logic of deterrence. Sitting in my garage late at night, the harsh fluorescent overhead light illuminating sketches and blueprints, I knew I couldn't hurt her. I possessed no desire for physical violence, no appetite for true illegality that would summon the wrath of the Naperville courts, but I needed a consequence, something so visceral, so undeniable, and so profoundly humiliating that it would shatter her bubble of entitlement forever. The concept hit me like a flash of inspiration, a cinematic revelation born from the depths of sheer, unadulterated frustration. I didn't need to build a wall. I needed to build a spectacle, a harmless but impossible to ignore explosion of accountability, leading my late-night internet searches away from legal statutes and toward the acquisition of ultra-fine, deeply saturated, completely non-toxic and biodegradable cornstarch powder, the kind used in joyful, chaotic color festivals, ordered in bulk quantities of neon magenta, electric cyan, and a blinding, fluorescent chartreuse. I became a suburban engineer of petty vengeance, designing small, shallow, pressurized chambers that would sit invisibly beneath the surface of the soil, utilizing simple mechanical pressure plates fashioned from heavy-duty acrylic, wired to small, disposable bursts of compressed air, so that any weight exceeding 40 pounds, a threshold perfectly calibrated to ignore wandering squirrels or neighborhood cats, would trigger a violent, upward release of the vibrant powder, creating a localized, blinding cloud of undeniable guilt. Building these 6 devices was a labor of intense, cathartic focus, my hands covered in grease and bright pigment, channeling every ounce of my repressed rage into the tightness of the springs and the seals of the canisters, creating a subterranean minefield of pure, washable consequence, a rainbow-hued defense system for my violated sanctuary. The installation required a cover story, a layer of plausible deniability to shield me from the immediate accusations of madness. So when trench digger Tom, an independent landscaper who had been doing heavy excavation work down the street near the Naperville River Walk, rolled past my house in his battered truck, I flagged him down, offering him a crisp $100 bill to perform some highly specific, deep core aeration along the exact diagonal path of destruction. I handed him the sealed, plastic mechanisms, lying through my teeth with a perfectly straight face, describing them as experimental, high-tech soil hydration monitors that needed to be buried flush with the root line, and Tom, wiping sweat from his brow, too tired to question the eccentricities of wealthy suburbanites, simply shrugged, dug the shallow trenches, and carefully laid my traps, replacing the sod so perfectly that the lawn looked entirely innocent, a pristine, green stage set for a highly anticipated, dramatic climax. The waiting was a physical ache, a knot of adrenaline twisting in my stomach as I stood concealed behind the sheer curtains of my living room window the following afternoon, my eyes locked on the corner of the street, watching the digital clock on my microwave tick towards 3:30, the exact, predictable hour of her daily intrusion. When Beatrice finally appeared, cresting the hill in a vibrant, spotless white track suit, a massive pair of dark sunglasses obscuring her eyes, her phone pressed tightly to her ear as she barked orders at some unseen subordinate, my breath caught in my throat, my hands gripping the windowsill so hard my knuckles turned white, silently urging her forward, praying that the mechanisms would hold, that the pressure plates wouldn't fail. She reached the edge of the concrete, didn't even pause to look at the pathway she was supposed to take, and with a familiar, arrogant stride, her expensive white sneaker came down heavily onto the grass, landing dead center on the first hidden plate, and time seemed to slow down to a cinematic crawl. The muffled thump of the compressed air releasing was instantly followed by a violent, majestic eruption of neon magenta powder, a thick, opaque cloud of brilliant, aggressive pink that shot upward from the earth, completely swallowing her right leg from the ankle to the knee in a shocking display of high-contrast color against the suburban backdrop. She froze, the phone slipping slightly from her grasp, a look of profound, uncomprehending shock washing over her features. But before her brain could even process the pink disaster, before she could even formulate a scream, her momentum carried her left foot forward, landing heavily on the second trigger, initiating a deafening, localized blast of electric cyan that billowed up, mixing with the settling magenta, coating her pristine white track suit in a vibrant, swirling galaxy of undeniable, chaotic retribution. Panic, raw and unfiltered, seized her, and in her frantic, flailing attempt to back away, to escape this nightmare of aggressive horticulture, she stumbled sideways, her heel coming down hard on the third and final trap in that cluster, sending a massive, blinding plume of fluorescent chartreuse straight up into the air, enveloping her entirely in a chaotic, technicolor fog, transforming the terrifying, arrogant neighbor into a coughing, sputtering, hyper-colorful abstract painting, a staggering monument to the consequences of trespassing. While I stood behind the glass, my heart soaring with a dark, euphoric, and deeply satisfying sense of absolute, poetic justice. The silence that followed the explosions was heavier than the humid Illinois air, broken only by the soft, settling hiss of the neon powder dusting the green grass, and the sudden, ear-piercing shriek that erupted from Beatrice's lungs, a sound of such pure, unadulterated outrage that it seemed to rattle the very window panes I was hiding behind. She stood there, a trembling, multi-hued apparition of pink, blue, and green, staring down at her ruined, expensive clothing, the sheer indignity of the moment breaking through her carefully constructed facade of superiority. And when her eyes finally snapped upward, locking onto my window, tracking the source of this calculated humiliation, the sheer venom in her glare was enough to freeze blood. She didn't retreat. She charged, stomping furiously toward my front porch, leaving a trail of brightly colored footprints across the driveway, pounding on my heavy oak door with fists covered in cyan dust, screaming my name with a ferocity that demanded an audience, forcing me to take a deep, steadying breath, compose my features into a mask of innocent, bewildered concern, and open the door to face the technicolor storm. "What in the name of God have you done to your lawn?" she bellowed, her voice echoing down the manicured streets of Cypress Creek Estates, jabbing a violently pink finger at my chest, accusing me of assault, of madness, of deliberately setting malicious traps to destroy her property and her dignity. I leaned against the doorframe, projecting an aura of calm, utterly unbothered detachment, and smoothly suggested, with a voice as gentle as a summer breeze, that perhaps she had disturbed a rare, indigenous pocket of brightly colored Chicago soil fungus, or perhaps she had wandered into the crossfire of some neighborhood children playing with art supplies, pointing out, with a subtle, razor-sharp edge to my tone, that such bizarre, colorful accidents only seem to happen to people who wander dangerously far off the safety of the public sidewalk, a statement that left her sputtering, vibrating with a rage so profound she couldn't formulate a coherent sentence, before she finally spun on her heel, storming back toward her house to summon the wrath of the authorities, a vibrant, trailing cloud of consequence following her every step. The bureaucratic retaliation was swift, brutal, and entirely expected, beginning with a frantic, hyperventilating phone call from Margaret at the Cypress Creek Homeowners Association, threatening me with immediate, astronomical fines for unapproved, hazardous landscaping modifications and the deployment of noxious airborne dyes. A threat I parried smoothly by emailing her the safety data sheets proving the powder was nothing but food-grade, biodegradable cornstarch, perfectly legal and entirely safe. But Beatrice wasn't satisfied with fines. She wanted blood, bringing a heavily sighing Officer Martinez from the Naperville Police Department to my doorstep, the poor man looking utterly exhausted as he stood on my porch, assessing the brightly colored blast zones on my lawn, forced to listen to her hysterical claims of chemical warfare. I walked him through it, calm and collected, explaining that these were merely harmless, non-toxic deterrents placed entirely within the boundaries of my private property, triggered only by the weight of a trespasser who had ignored repeated, polite warnings. And while Officer Martinez agreed that no criminal assault had taken place, he leveled a stern, serious gaze at me, warning me of the crushing civil liability I faced if a child, a delivery driver, or anyone else accidentally wandered into my minefield and suffered an injury in their panic, a sobering reality check that poured a bucket of cold water over my euphoric victory. For 2 tense, exhausting weeks, the neighborhood existed in a bizarre state of Cold War, my lawn cordoned off with little yellow flags, the vibrant stains slowly washing away in the rain. But the silence, the glorious, unbroken silence of my property line, was deafening. Beatrice refused to come within 10 feet of my grass, taking wide, exaggerated detours onto the asphalt, glaring daggers at my house. But utterly broken of her habit, her entitlement finally checked by the fear of the unknown. The pressure, however, was unsustainable. The looming threat of a civil lawsuit, the mounting stress of checking the lawn every morning, the suffocating weight of being the neighborhood pariah. So, under the cover of a moonless night, feeling a strange mix of defeat and profound accomplishment, I took a shovel, carefully unearthed my 6 plastic mechanisms, neutralized the air pressure, and buried the evidence, returning my sanctuary to its ordinary, vulnerable state. The HOA eventually backed down, dropping the fines when the monitors disappeared, and the police never returned, leaving me standing on my porch with a cup of coffee, looking out at a lawn that was once again just grass, but carrying the invisible, lingering weight of a war that had been fought and won in the most absurd, deeply stressful manner possible. The sanctuary was restored, the roses bloomed without fear of being crushed, and the boundary, though invisible once more, was now protected by a psychological barrier far stronger than any wrought iron fence. But as I watched Beatrice stubbornly march down the concrete sidewalk, refusing to even glance in my direction, a cold, unsettling question lingers in the quiet suburban air. When the systems designed to maintain order fail us, when politeness is exploited and boundaries are mocked by the entitled, are we justified in descending into chaos, in architecting our own petty, psychological warfare to protect what is ours? Or does fighting fire with neon-colored explosions simply make us the very monsters we are trying to keep off our lawns?
Thanks so much for watching until the end. If you enjoyed the video, please hit that like button, drop a comment telling me your thoughts. And don't forget to subscribe, turn on the bell so you never miss the next one. See you in the next video.